The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors of the East Wing corridor. Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his earpiece and checked his watch. 0847 hours. His 23 years of service in the Royal Protection Command had taught him to read the subtle rhythms of palace life, and this Tuesday felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a tension that seemed to vibrate through the ancient walls like a tuning fork struck against stone. James had been assigned to Princess Charlotte's security detail for 18 months now, watching the young princess navigate the complex world of royal obligations with remarkable grace for someone so young. At 11 years old, Charlotte possessed an unusual combination of her grandmother's dignity and her father's warmth, traits that endeared her to staff and public alike. The protection officers often remarked among themselves how naturally she carried herself, never seeming burdened by the weight of her position. The princess emerged from her private study, her school bag slung over her shoulder, auburn hair neatly braided as always. She smiled at James with genuine warmth, a gesture that never failed to remind him why he took his job so seriously. This wasn't just about protecting a member of the royal family, this was about safeguarding a child who happened to be born into extraordinary circumstances. "Good morning, Sergeant Mitchell," Charlotte said politely, her voice carrying the crisp diction expected of someone in her position, yet retaining the natural cadence of childhood. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," James replied, falling into step beside her as they moved toward the main staircase. The familiar routine of escorting Charlotte to her morning lessons had become one of the more pleasant aspects of his duties. As they walked, James noticed the unusual absence of other staff members in the corridors. Typically, this time of morning saw a steady stream of palace employees going about their duties, but today the halls felt almost deserted. His training kicked in automatically, heightening his awareness as he scanned doorways and assessed potential threats. Nothing seemed immediately dangerous, yet the atmosphere felt charged with unspoken tension. The sound of rapid footsteps echoed from the corridor behind them, growing closer with each passing second. James instinctively positioned himself slightly between Charlotte and the approaching sound, his hand moving unconsciously toward his radio. The footsteps belonged to Sarah Whitmore, one of Queen Camilla's senior private secretaries, her usually composed demeanor replaced by visible agitation. "Sergeant Mitchell," Sarah called out, slightly breathless from her hurried pace. "Her Majesty requires Princess Charlotte's immediate presence in the blue drawing room." James noted the formal language and the absence of the usual pleasantries that typically accompanied such requests. In his experience, sudden changes to established routines often indicated developing situations that required careful handling. Charlotte looked up at him with questioning eyes, clearly picking up on the unusual nature of the summons. "Of course," James replied evenly. "We'll escort Her Royal Highness there directly." The journey to the blue drawing room took them through some of the palace's most magnificent corridors, past portraits of long-dead monarchs and displays of priceless artwork. Charlotte walked with her characteristic composure, though James could sense her curiosity about the unexpected change to her schedule. The blue drawing room served as one of the more formal reception areas, typically reserved for official meetings and ceremonial functions. As they approached the ornate double doors, James could hear voices from within. Queen Camilla's distinctive tone carried through the heavy wood, though the specific words remained indistinct. He positioned himself outside the doors as Charlotte was escorted inside, following standard protocol for such situations. The conversation inside began cordially enough, with the expected formal greetings between step-grandmother and granddaughter. James found himself studying the intricate molding around the doorframe, a technique he'd developed over the years to maintain focus during long periods of standing guard. The craftsmanship spoke to centuries of royal tradition, each detail carefully preserved and maintained. The palace walls had witnessed countless conversations between monarchs and their families, some pleasant, others far more challenging. The tone of voices from within the room began to shift, growing more serious. James couldn't make out specific words, but his trained ear detected rising tension in the conversation. Queen Camilla's voice became more authoritative, while Charlotte's responses grew shorter and more subdued. This pattern often indicated difficult discussions, something James had observed during his years of service. Minutes stretched by as the conversation continued, punctuated by periods of silence that seemed to hang heavy in the air. James maintained his professional demeanor while internally cataloging the unusual circumstances of this meeting. The formal summoning, the change to Charlotte's routine, the absence of other family members, all these factors suggested something significant was occurring. The voices inside grew more animated, though still maintaining the careful diction expected in royal discourse. James detected what sounded like protestation in Charlotte's voice, a rare display of disagreement from someone trained from birth to show deference to senior family members. Queen Camilla's responses became increasingly firm, her words carrying the weight of absolute authority. A particularly sharp exchange caused James to straighten slightly, his professional instincts heightening his attention. While he couldn't determine the specific nature of the disagreement, the emotional intensity was unmistakable. Charlotte's voice carried a note of distress that made James unconsciously shift his weight, ready to respond if needed. The conversation inside reached what seemed to be a crescendo, with Queen Camilla's voice rising to a level that carried clearly through the doors. Her words became harsh, brooking no argument or negotiation. James could hear Charlotte's quiet response, the words barely audible but carrying an unmistakable note of defeat. Suddenly, the doors opened with more force than necessary, and Charlotte emerged with tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Her composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the vulnerable child beneath the royal training. She walked past James without making eye contact, her shoulders slightly hunched in a posture he'd never seen from her before. Queen Camilla appeared in the doorway, her expression stern and unyielding. Her eyes fixed on James with an intensity that seemed to burn through his professional composure. The weight of royal authority hung around her like a mantle, making the air itself feel heavier. "Sergeant Mitchell," she commanded, her voice carrying absolute certainty of obedience. "Detain Princess Charlotte." The words hit James like a physical blow, each syllable seeming to echo in the suddenly silent corridor. In his 23 years of service, he had never received such an order. The Royal Protection Command existed to safeguard members of the royal family, not to detain them. The contradiction between his sworn duty and this direct command created a moment of cognitive dissonance that left him momentarily speechless. Charlotte stopped walking and turned back, her eyes wide with shock and growing fear. The tears that had been threatening now began to flow freely down her cheeks as she looked between Queen Camilla and James, searching for some explanation that would make sense of this nightmare scenario. James felt the weight of his training, his oath of service, and his fundamental sense of right and wrong colliding in a perfect storm of conflicting obligations. Queen Camilla stood waiting for his compliance, her expression making clear that she expected immediate and unquestioning obedience. Charlotte remained frozen in place, looking utterly lost and vulnerable. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and unspoken questions. James could feel his heartbeat accelerating as he processed the unprecedented situation. Every protocol he'd learned, every scenario he'd trained for, had prepared him for protecting members of the royal family from external threats. None had prepared him for this moment when the threat seemed to come from within. Queen Camilla's eyes narrowed slightly as she waited for his response, her posture radiating the absolute expectation of compliance that came with a lifetime of having commands obeyed without question. The power dynamics of the monarchy pressed down on the moment like a weight that threatened to crush any resistance. James looked at Charlotte, seeing not a member of the royal family in that moment, but simply a frightened child who needed protection. Her eyes pleaded with him silently, though whether for help or simply understanding, he couldn't be sure. The innocence in her expression stood in stark contrast to the harsh authority emanating from Queen Camilla. As the seconds ticked by, James realized that his next words would define not only this moment, but likely the remainder of his career and, quite possibly, his life. The choice before him seemed to crystallize into something almost tangible: follow orders without question, or ask the question that his conscience demanded but his training told him to suppress. The weight of 23 years of faithful service pressed against his growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with this situation. James had sworn an oath to protect and serve, but, in this moment, those two obligations seemed to be pulling him in opposite directions with equal force. James Mitchell drew in a careful breath, feeling the weight of every eye upon him in that marble-lined corridor. The silence had stretched so long that it seemed to take on a life of its own, pressing against his eardrums like water at great depth. Queen Camilla's expression remained fixed in a mask of absolute authority, while Princess Charlotte stood trembling, caught between flight and the ingrained royal training that demanded she remain composed even in crisis. "Your Majesty," James began, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest, "might I respectfully ask on what grounds Princess Charlotte is to be detained?" The question hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before a medieval court. Queen Camilla's eyes flashed with surprise that quickly transformed into cold fury. In her decades of royal life, few had dared to question her direct commands, particularly not members of staff whose positions depended entirely upon royal favor. "I beg your pardon, Sergeant Mitchell?" Her voice carried the dangerous quiet that preceded royal storms. "Are you questioning my authority?" James felt sweat forming beneath his collar, but his resolve only strengthened as he glanced at Charlotte, who was watching this exchange with growing amazement. No one had ever stood between her and adult authority before, especially not for her sake. The realization that someone was willing to risk everything to protect her seemed to restore some small measure of strength to her bearing. "Not your authority, your majesty, but the legal basis for such an action," James replied, drawing upon his years of training in both royal protocol and law enforcement procedures. "Princess Charlotte is a minor member of the royal family under the protection of this detail. Any detention would require specific protocols to be followed." Queen Camilla stepped forward, her presence seeming to fill the corridor with barely contained rage. "That child has been spreading malicious lies about members of this family. She has betrayed confidences and violated the trust that has been placed in her. Such behavior cannot and will not be tolerated." Charlotte's gasp echoed off the high ceiling, her small hands flying to her mouth in shock. "I never spread lies," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of the accusation. "I would never do such a thing." "Silence!" Queen Camilla snapped, wheeling toward Charlotte with fury blazing in her eyes. "Your denials mean nothing. The evidence of your treachery has been presented to me, and I will not have this family's reputation destroyed by a spoiled child who cannot keep confidential matters to herself." James watched this exchange with growing alarm, his protective instincts overriding years of protocol training. The dynamic he was witnessing felt fundamentally wrong: an adult in a position of absolute power using that authority to intimidate and terrorize a child. Every fiber of his being as both a protection officer and a human being rebelled against what he was seeing. "What specific lies is Princess Charlotte accused of spreading?" James asked, his question cutting through Queen Camilla's tirade like a sword through silk. The Queen turned back to him with an expression that could have frozen flame. "That is none of your concern, Sergeant Mitchell. Your job is to follow orders, not to conduct interrogations of your betters." But James had noted something crucial in that moment, a flicker of uncertainty that crossed Queen Camilla's features before the mask of authority reasserted itself. In his years of investigative training before joining the Royal Protection Command, he had learned to recognize the subtle tells that indicated when someone was not being entirely truthful. "With respect, Your Majesty, my job is to protect Princess Charlotte," James replied firmly. "If she is to be detained, I need to understand the nature of the threat she allegedly poses and ensure that proper procedures are followed. The safety and welfare of those under my protection is my primary responsibility." Princess Charlotte looked up at James with something approaching wonder. In her short life, she had grown accustomed to adults deferring to authority without question, especially when that authority came from senior members of the royal family. The sight of someone willing to stand up for her, to demand answers on her behalf, was entirely foreign to her experience. Queen Camilla's composure began to crack, revealing the volcanic emotions beneath her carefully maintained exterior. "How dare you lecture me about procedures, you insolent man? I am the Queen Consort of England, and I will not be questioned by hired security staff about family matters." "Then, perhaps we should contact His Majesty the King," James suggested quietly. As Princess Charlotte's grandfather and the head of the family, he would surely want to be informed about any situation requiring the detention of his granddaughter. The suggestion hit Queen Camilla like a physical blow. Her face went pale, then, flushed with anger so intense that James instinctively stepped closer to Charlotte, sensing that the situation was about to escalate beyond anything he had anticipated. "You will do no such thing," Queen Camilla hissed. "The king is occupied with matters of state and is not to be disturbed by domestic issues." But James had caught another telling detail: the way Queen Camilla's eyes had darted away when he mentioned contacting the king. His years of experience reading people told him that she was hiding something significant, something that would not withstand the scrutiny that royal involvement would bring. Charlotte, meanwhile, had been following this extraordinary conversation with growing comprehension. Despite her youth, she possessed her father's sharp intelligence and her grandmother's intuitive understanding of human nature. She began to recognize that the accusations against her might not be as solid as Queen Camilla claimed. "What lies am I supposed to have told?" Charlotte asked, her voice gaining strength as she sensed James's protective presence behind her. "I want to know exactly what I'm accused of doing." Queen Camilla whirled toward her with renewed fury. "You told someone about private family conversations. You violated the sacred trust that exists within these walls. You betrayed confidences that were shared in good faith." But Charlotte was shaking her head even before the accusations were complete. "I never told anyone anything private. I know better than that. I've known since I was tiny that family conversations stay within the family. James observed this exchange with growing clarity about the real situation. Princess Charlotte's bewilderment seemed entirely genuine, while Queen Camilla's accusations remained vague and unspecific. Moreover, the Queen's reluctance to involve other family members suggested that her position might not withstand scrutiny from those with equal or greater authority. "If I may, Your Majesty," James said carefully, "what evidence exists to support these accusations?" In any matter involving the detention of a minor, documentation would be essential to protect all parties involved. Queen Camilla's eyes blazed with such fury that James briefly wondered if she might actually attempt to strike him. The very foundation of royal authority rested upon unquestioning obedience, and his continued questions represented a direct challenge to that entire system. "Evidence," she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "I need no evidence beyond my own knowledge and judgment. The word of senior members of this family carries absolute authority, and I will not have that authority questioned by staff members who forget their place." But, even as she spoke these words, James noticed that Queen Camilla had still not provided any specific details about what Charlotte had allegedly done. The accusations remained general and vague, lacking the concrete specificity that would characterize genuine wrongdoing. Charlotte stepped forward slightly, her initial fear transforming into something resembling righteous indignation. "I want to talk to Papa," she said firmly. "If I'm accused of something this serious, I want to speak to my father." "Your father is attending to his duties and cannot be bothered with this matter," Queen Camilla replied sharply. "This situation will be handled within the proper family hierarchy." James felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. The isolation of Charlotte from other family members, the vague accusations without specific evidence, the reluctance to involve higher authorities, all of these factors pointed towards something far more complex than a simple case of a child misbehaving. "I'm afraid I cannot comply with your order to detain Princess Charlotte without proper documentation and authorization," James said quietly but firmly. "My duty is to protect her safety and welfare, and that includes protecting her from detention without just cause." The corridor fell silent except for the sound of Queen Camilla's rapid breathing and the distant chiming of a palace clock marking the hour. Charlotte moved closer to James, instinctively seeking the protection of the only adult who seemed willing to defend her interests. Queen Camilla's mask finally slipped completely, revealing a woman consumed by rage and, perhaps something deeper, fear. "You will regret this insubordination, Sergeant Mitchell. Your career, your pension, your entire future depends upon royal favor, and you are throwing it all away for a spoiled child who cannot be trusted to keep family secrets." James met her gaze steadily, feeling a calm settle over him that came with making an irreversible decision. "My career has always been dedicated to protecting those who cannot protect themselves, Your Majesty. I see no reason to abandon that principle now." The standoff stretched between them, two irreconcilable forces meeting in a collision that would reshape everything that followed. Princess Charlotte, standing between them, began to understand that she was witnessing something far larger than a simple family dispute. She was seeing the very foundations of royal authority challenged by one man's unwavering commitment to doing what he believed was right. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor, breaking the tense standoff like thunder splitting a summer sky. James turned to see Detective Inspector Sarah Chen of the Royal Protection Command hurrying toward them, her expression grave and purposeful. Behind her walked two additional officers, their presence immediately transforming the dynamics of the confrontation. "Sergeant Mitchell," D.I. Chen called out as she approached, "we've received reports of a situation requiring immediate attention." Queen Camilla's face flushed with triumph, clearly believing that reinforcements had arrived to support her position. "Inspector Chen, I have ordered Sergeant Mitchell to detain Princess Charlotte, and he has refused to comply. I expect you to remedy this insubordination immediately." But Inspector Chen's response was not what Queen Camilla expected. Instead of directing her officers toward Charlotte, she turned to James with a look that conveyed both respect and concern. "Sergeant, can you brief me on the current situation?" James felt a wave of relief wash over him as he recognized the careful professionalism in his superior's approach. Inspector Chen had earned her position through merit and dedication, and her reputation for thorough investigation preceded her throughout the command. "Ma'am, Her Majesty has ordered me to detain Princess Charlotte on allegations of spreading family secrets," James reported clearly. "I have requested specific evidence and proper authorization, but none has been provided. Princess Charlotte denies any wrongdoing and has requested to speak with her father." Inspector Chen nodded thoughtfully, her experienced eyes taking in the scene: the frightened princess, the furious queen consort, and the steadfast protection officer who had chosen principle over career advancement. In her 15 years with the Royal Protection Command, she had encountered numerous complex situations, but few with such clear moral implications. "Your Majesty," Inspector Chen said with careful diplomatic language, "any detention of a minor member of the royal family would require specific protocols to be followed. These procedures exist to protect both the individual involved and the integrity of the institution." Queen Camilla's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you also questioning my authority, Inspector Chen?" "Not at all, Your Majesty," Chen replied evenly. "I am simply ensuring that all actions taken are legally sound and properly documented. If Princess Charlotte has committed some offense requiring detention, we will need written authorization from His Majesty the King, along with specific details of the alleged wrongdoing." The mention of requiring the King's written authorization caused Queen Camilla to take an involuntary step backward. The color drained from her face as the implications of that requirement became clear. Any official detention order would necessarily involve higher authorities and create a paper trail that could be scrutinized later. Princess Charlotte, who had been following this exchange with remarkable composure for someone her age, spoke up with quiet dignity. "I want to call Papa right now. If I've done something wrong, he should know about it." "That won't be necessary," Queen Camilla said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "This is a minor family matter that doesn't require disturbing the King's schedule." Inspector Chen exchanged a meaningful look with James, both experienced officers recognizing the significance of Queen Camilla's reluctance to involve higher authorities. In legitimate cases requiring detention, family notification would be standard procedure, not something to be avoided. "If I may, Your Majesty," Inspector Chen continued diplomatically, "could you provide us with the specific details of what Princess Charlotte is alleged to have done? Understanding the nature of the offense would help us determine the appropriate response." Queen Camilla's composure began to crack under the sustained questioning. She violated family confidentiality. She spoke to outside parties about private matters that should never have left these walls. "What specific private matters?" James asked, his training taking over as he pursued the line of inquiry. "Who did she allegedly speak to? When did this occur?" The barrage of specific questions clearly flustered Queen Camilla, who had evidently not expected to face this level of scrutiny. Her responses became increasingly vague and defensive, lacking the concrete details that would characterize genuine allegations. "I don't need to provide you with every detail," she snapped. "My word should be sufficient authority for any action I deem necessary." Charlotte stepped forward, her young voice carrying surprising strength. "I never told anyone anything private about our family. I know that family conversations are sacred, and I would never betray that trust." Inspector Chen studied Charlotte's earnest face, noting the genuine bewilderment and hurt in her expression. In her experience, children who were actually guilty of serious wrongdoing typically displayed very different behavioral patterns: defensiveness, evasion, or elaborate explanations. Charlotte's straightforward denial and obvious confusion suggested someone who genuinely had no idea what she was being accused of. "Perhaps we could resolve this matter by contacting Princess Charlotte's parents," Inspector Chen suggested reasonably. As her legal guardians, they would naturally want to be involved in any serious allegation against their daughter. "Absolutely not!" Queen Camilla exclaimed, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. "This matter is to be handled discreetly within the family hierarchy, without involving unnecessary parties." But her vehement refusal to involve Charlotte's parents only strengthened the officer's growing suspicions that something was fundamentally wrong with the entire situation. In legitimate cases involving royal children, parental notification would be not just appropriate but mandatory. James felt a growing conviction that Princess Charlotte was being targeted unfairly, though the reasons remained unclear. His protective instincts, honed by years of training and experience, told him that the real threat to Charlotte's well-being was standing directly in front of them. "Your Majesty," Inspector Chen said carefully, "I must inform you that without proper documentation and authorization, we cannot proceed with any detention. Our primary duty is to ensure the safety and welfare of all family members, and that includes protecting them from actions that lack proper legal foundation." Queen Camilla's face turned an alarming shade of red as she realized that her authority was being openly challenged by multiple officers. In her world, such defiance was virtually unthinkable, yet here she stood facing a united front of protection officers who refused to bend to her will. "You will all face serious consequences for this insubordination," she threatened, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Your careers will be destroyed, your reputations ruined. The royal family does not tolerate disobedience from its staff. But Inspector Chen had seen enough royal tantrums in her career to remain unmoved by threats. We understand your concerns, Your Majesty, but our first responsibility is always to the safety and legal rights of those under our protection. If you wish to file formal charges against Princess Charlotte, proper procedures must be followed. Charlotte, who had been listening to this extraordinary confrontation with wide eyes, suddenly spoke with clarity that surprised everyone present. I think I know what this is really about. All eyes turned toward the young princess, who stood straighter as she found her courage. James felt a surge of admiration for the way she was handling herself under such intense pressure. Yesterday, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, Charlotte continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I was looking for a book in the library when I heard voices from the private study next door. The door was partially open, and I sought silence. Queen Camilla commanded, her voice rising to a near shriek. You will not speak of private family matters to staff members. But Charlotte had found her resolve, strengthened by the presence of officers who were clearly willing to protect her. I saw Queen Camilla meeting with a man I didn't recognize. They were looking at photographs and talking about selling them to newspapers. She said they would pay millions for the right pictures. The revelation hit the corridor like a thunderbolt, illuminating the true nature of the conflict with stark clarity. Inspector Chen and James exchanged shocked looks as the pieces of the puzzle suddenly fell into place. Queen Camilla had gone completely white, her mask of authority crumbling as the implications of Charlotte's words sank in. You lying child, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. That's why you want me detained, isn't it? Charlotte pressed on, her young voice carrying the ring of absolute truth. You're afraid I'll tell Papa what I saw. You want to keep me quiet until you can figure out how to handle the situation. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Queen Camilla's labored breathing. Inspector Chen felt the weight of duty settling on her shoulders as she realized they were dealing with something far more serious than a simple family dispute. Your Majesty, Inspector Chen said quietly, I believe we need to involve senior leadership immediately. These allegations require full investigation by appropriate authorities. Queen Camilla looked around the corridor like a trapped animal, seeing her carefully constructed plans crumbling around her. The officers stood united in their protection of Charlotte, and her authority had proven insufficient to bend them to her will. James moved slightly closer to Charlotte, his protective stance making clear that any attempt to silence or intimidate her would have to go through him first. After 23 years of faithful service, he had finally found a cause worthy of risking everything, protecting an innocent child from those who would abuse their power. The aftermath of Charlotte's revelation transformed the ornate corridor into something resembling a command center under siege. Inspector Chen immediately activated her secure radio, summoning additional senior officers while ensuring that the area remained contained. Queen Camilla stood frozen in place, her earlier fury replaced by something approaching panic as the full scope of her situation became apparent. Princess Charlotte, Inspector Chen said gently, kneeling to bring herself to the girl's eye level, what you've shared is extremely serious. I need you to tell me everything you remember about what you saw and heard yesterday. Charlotte looked toward James, who gave her an encouraging nod. The trust she had placed in him had been validated by his willingness to stand against authority on her behalf, and now she drew strength from his steady presence. I was looking for a book about horses in the library, Charlotte began, her voice steadying as she recounted the events. The door to the private study next door wasn't completely closed, and I heard voices. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I recognized Queen Camilla's voice talking to someone I'd never heard before. Queen Camilla made a sharp sound of protest, but Inspector Chen raised a hand for silence without taking her eyes off Charlotte. What did you hear them discussing? The man was showing her photographs on his phone, Charlotte continued. They looked like pictures of our family during private moments at Balmoral last summer, and some from Christmas morning. Queen Camilla was asking about how much newspapers would pay for exclusive pictures. The weight of these accusations settled over the group like a heavy blanket. James felt his professional anger building as he contemplated the betrayal of trust that Charlotte was describing. The royal family's private moments were sacred, protected not just by law but by centuries of tradition and honor. The man said they could get millions if they timed the release properly, Charlotte added quietly. Queen Camilla said she needed money for some investments that had gone wrong, and that the family would never even know the pictures had come from inside the palace. Inspector Chen's expression grew increasingly grave as she processed the implications. If Charlotte's account was accurate, they were dealing with a breach of security so fundamental that it struck at the very heart of royal privacy and protection.
Did you see the man clearly? Inspector Chen asked. Would you be able to identify him if you saw him again?
Charlotte nodded solemnly. He had gray hair and wore a suit with a red tie.
He had an accent like he might be American.
And he left a business card on the desk when he left. Queen Camilla finally found her voice, though it emerged as little more than a desperate whisper. These are the fantasies of an attention-seeking child. She's making up stories to deflect from her own wrongdoing. But Inspector Chen had noticed something crucial throughout Charlotte's detailed account. Queen Camilla had not denied any specific elements of the story. Instead, she had resorted to general character attacks, a defensive tactic that often indicated someone caught in an indefensible position. The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of Commander William Hughes, the head of Royal Protection Command. His presence immediately elevated the seriousness of the situation, and even Queen Camilla straightened involuntarily as he approached.
Inspector Chen, Commander Hughes said briskly, I understand we have a situation requiring immediate attention.
Yes, sir, Inspector Chen replied, rising to her feet. We have serious allegations involving potential security breaches and unauthorized contact with media representatives. Commander Hughes listened intently as Inspector Chen provided a concise briefing on the developing situation. His experienced face showed no emotion as he processed the information, but James could see the commander's sharp intelligence working through the implications. Princess Charlotte, Commander Hughes said kindly, you've been very brave in sharing this information. I want you to know that we take these matters extremely seriously, and you will be protected throughout our investigation. The reassurance from such a senior authority figure seemed to give Charlotte renewed confidence. She had spent her young life learning to trust in the institutions that surrounded the royal family, and seeing those institutions respond to protect her validated that trust. Queen Camilla attempted to reassert control over the situation. Commander Hughes, I insist that this matter be handled discreetly within the family. There is no need for formal investigations or outside involvement. But Commander Hughes had not reached his position by yielding to pressure, regardless of its source. Your Majesty, allegations of security breaches and potential criminal activity must be investigated thoroughly and by the book. The integrity of royal protection depends upon our willingness to follow proper procedures without exception.
James watched this exchange with professional admiration.
Commander Hughes embodied the principles that had drawn James to the Royal Protection Command in the first place: unwavering commitment to duty, integrity in the face of pressure, and absolute dedication to protecting those under their care. I want to call my father immediately, Charlotte said firmly.
He needs to know what's happening.
Queen Camilla's composure cracked further at this suggestion. Your father is occupied with matters of state. This can be handled without disturbing his schedule. Actually, Commander Hughes interjected, notification of family members is standard protocol in situations like this.
His Royal Highness will need to be informed immediately.
The mention of involving Prince William caused Queen Camilla to take an involuntary step backward. James noted that her reluctance to involve senior family members had been consistent throughout the confrontation, suggesting that her position would not withstand scrutiny from those with greater authority. Inspector Chen had been quietly observing Queen Camilla's reactions throughout the discussion. Your Majesty, you mentioned that Princess Charlotte had violated family confidentiality. If these allegations are accurate, it appears that the real violation of confidentiality came from elsewhere. The accusation hung in the air like a sword suspended over Queen Camilla's head. Her earlier fury had been replaced by something approaching desperation as she realized that her position was becoming increasingly untenable. Furthermore, Commander Hughes added, if unauthorized individuals have had access to private family photographs, we have a significant security breach that requires immediate investigation.
Every aspect of palace security protocols will need to be reviewed.
Charlotte stepped closer to James, drawing comfort from his protective presence. The ordeal had been traumatic, but she was beginning to understand that justice was possible when good people were willing to stand up for what was right. The business card, Inspector Chen said suddenly.
Princess Charlotte mentioned that the visitor left a business card. If it's still in the private study, it could provide crucial evidence. Queen Camilla's face went pale as she realized the implications.
Physical evidence would transform Charlotte's testimony from mere allegations into the foundation for a serious investigation that could expose everything. I think we should secure that study immediately, Commander Hughes decided. Inspector Chen, please organize a forensic team to process the scene. Any evidence of unauthorized contact with outside parties must be preserved.
The net was closing around Queen Camilla with methodical precision.
James felt a sense of satisfaction watching proper procedures unfold, knowing that his decision to question her orders had set in motion events that would likely prevent far greater damage to the royal family.
This is preposterous, Queen Camilla protested, but her voice lacked conviction.
You're treating a minor family disagreement as if it were a major crime.
Commander Hughes met her gaze steadily. Your Majesty, selling private family photographs to media outlets would constitute multiple serious offenses.
If such activities have occurred, they represent not just criminal behavior but fundamental betrayal of the trust placed in family members.
Charlotte looked up at James with gratitude shining in her young eyes.
His willingness to ask one simple question, to demand justification for an unjust order, had transformed a nightmare into the beginning of justice. The courage of one protection officer had prevented her from being silenced and allowed the truth to emerge. As additional officers arrived to secure the scene and begin the investigation, James realized that his career would likely never be the same. But, standing there, watching Princess Charlotte find her voice and her strength, he knew that some things were worth more than career security. 3 hours later, Buckingham Palace buzzed with controlled activity as investigators worked methodically through every aspect of the unfolding scandal. Prince William had arrived within 30 minutes of being contacted, his face grave with concern for his daughter and fury at the betrayal of family trust. The private study had yielded a treasure trove of evidence, not just the business card Charlotte had mentioned, but also deleted text messages recovered from a tablet, bank transaction records, and even draft agreements for photograph sales. James stood at his usual post outside the main conference room where senior family members and security officials were conducting their emergency meeting. Through the heavy oak doors, he could occasionally hear raised voices as the full scope of Queen Camilla's activities became clear. The investigation had uncovered months of systematic contact with media representatives, resulting in the sale of dozens of private family photographs that had appeared in tabloids across Europe and America. Princess Charlotte sat in a comfortable chair nearby, no longer the frightened child from that morning but a young woman who had found her courage in the face of adversity. Prince William had spent considerable time with her, listening to her account and praising her bravery in speaking truth despite the pressure to remain silent.
Sergeant Mitchell, Charlotte said quietly, may I ask you something?
James turned toward her with the same respectful attention he had always shown.
Of course, Your Royal Highness. When Queen Camilla ordered you to detain me, you could have just followed orders. Why did you choose to ask questions instead?
The question went to the heart of everything that had transpired, and James considered his response carefully. Your Royal Highness, my oath is to protect and serve the royal family.
Sometimes protection means questioning orders that don't serve the best interests of those we're sworn to guard.
Charlotte nodded thoughtfully.
Papa says that real courage isn't about never being afraid, it's about doing the right thing even when you are afraid. Were you afraid this morning?
James smiled slightly.
Terrified, actually. But some things are more important than fear.
The conference room doors opened, and Prince William emerged looking both relieved and exhausted. His eyes found his daughter immediately, and Charlotte rose to meet him with the natural grace that marked all her movements.
How are you holding up, my brave girl? Prince William asked, embracing his daughter warmly.
I'm all right, Papa, Charlotte replied. Sergeant Mitchell and Inspector Chen made sure I was safe. Prince William turned toward James with an expression of profound gratitude.
Sergeant Mitchell, I understand that your quick thinking and moral courage prevented a serious miscarriage of justice today. My daughter could have been detained and silenced while evidence of real wrongdoing was destroyed.
Your Royal Highness, I was simply doing my duty, James replied, though the weight of royal recognition meant more than he would admit. You were doing far more than duty required, Prince William corrected firmly. You were demonstrating the highest principles of service and protection.
The royal family is fortunate to have officers of your caliber.
Commander Hughes appeared in the doorway, his expression indicating that the investigation had reached significant conclusions.
Your Royal Highness, we've completed our preliminary review.
The evidence is substantial and clear. The group moved into a smaller private sitting room where they could discuss the findings without the formal atmosphere of the main conference room. Charlotte was included at her father's insistence. She had earned the right to understand the resolution of events she had helped bring to light. The investigation has confirmed Princess Charlotte's account in every detail, Commander Hughes reported. We've identified 17 separate instances over the past 6 months where private family photographs were sold to media outlets.
The total amount received was just over £2 million. Prince William's jaw tightened as he processed the scale of the betrayal. And the motivation? Financial difficulties stemming from poor investment decisions, Inspector Chen added.
Queen Camilla had accumulated significant debts and saw the sale of family photographs as a way to resolve her problems discreetly.
Charlotte looked puzzled. But why didn't she just ask for help? Families are supposed to help each other with problems. Prince William's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. That's exactly what families should do, Charlotte.
Unfortunately, pride and poor judgment led Queen Camilla to make choices that betrayed the trust we all placed in her.
What will happen to her now?
Charlotte asked, displaying the natural empathy that had always marked her character. Commander Hughes and Prince William exchanged glances before the prince answered carefully. There will be consequences, both legal and within the family.
But that's not something you need to worry about.
The important thing is that the truth came out and justice will be served. James felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that his decision to question unjust orders had prevented Charlotte from being silenced and had allowed the real crimes to be exposed. The investigation had revealed that Queen Camilla's plan had been to detain Charlotte indefinitely while destroying evidence and crafting cover stories to explain away any future revelations. Sergeant Mitchell, Prince William continued, I want to discuss your future with the Royal Protection Command. Your actions today demonstrate exactly the kind of judgment and courage we need in senior positions. The suggestion caught James by surprise. He had spent the morning expecting his career to end in disgrace, only to find himself being considered for advancement based on his willingness to do what was right. Your Royal Highness, I've simply tried to uphold the principles I swore to defend, James replied. Which is exactly why you're being considered for promotion to Inspector, Commander Hughes added. We need leaders who understand that true loyalty sometimes requires the courage to ask difficult questions. Charlotte beamed at this news, clearly pleased that the man who had protected her was being recognized for his service. Will you still be part of my security detail? She asked. If that assignment continues to serve the command's needs, James replied diplomatically, though he hoped the answer would be yes. His respect and affection for Charlotte had only grown throughout the ordeal.
Inspector Chen approached the group with a final update. Your Royal Highness, we've completed our review of all security protocols. Recommendations for preventing similar breaches in the future will be implemented immediately. And the media outlets that purchased the photographs? Prince William inquired.
Legal action is being pursued against all parties involved, Commander Hughes confirmed.
The unauthorized publication of private family images constitutes multiple violations of privacy law.
As the formal business concluded, Charlotte approached James one final time. Sergeant Mitchell, I learned something important today about standing up for what's right, even when it's frightening.
Thank you for teaching me that lesson.
James felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with career advancement or royal recognition. This young princess had shown remarkable courage throughout an ordeal that would have broken many adults, and, knowing that he had played a role in protecting her gave his service deeper meaning than he had ever imagined. Your Royal Highness, James replied formally, it has been my honor to serve and protect you.
Your courage today inspired everyone who witnessed it.
As the investigation teams packed away their equipment and the palace began returning to its normal rhythms, James reflected on the extraordinary events of the day. One simple question asking for justification of an unjust order had prevented a miscarriage of justice and exposed corruption at the highest levels of the royal household. The setting sun cast long shadows through the tall palace windows as James resumed his post outside Charlotte's study room, where she was completing the schoolwork that had been interrupted that morning. The familiar routine felt different now, charged with a deeper understanding of what protection truly meant. Sometimes the greatest threats came not from outside enemies but from those who betrayed trust from within. And sometimes the greatest protection came not from following orders blindly, but from having the courage to ask the questions that reveal truth and preserve justice. In the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, where tradition and duty had guided generations of faithful service, one protection officer had learned that the highest form of loyalty was not obedience without question, but the wisdom to know when conscience must override command. The young princess he protected had shown him that courage could emerge from the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the smallest voices carried the greatest truth. As James settled into the familiar rhythm of his duties, he carried with him the knowledge that he had made the right choice not just for his career or his conscience, but for the innocent child whose trust he had honored and whose future he had helped secure.